The cough was the first sign of death. It was a hacking, metallic shudder that ran through the steering wheel and up Olivia's arms. Then came the stutter, a series of violent jerks that sloshed the last of her coffee from its cup onto the passenger seat. Finally, with a long, mournful groan, the engine gave out. Silence descended, thick and absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the cooling metal. She was stranded, in a red dress that felt paper-thin against the encroaching night, on a lonely stretch of country road, with a blind date waiting for her in a city that now felt 1,000,000 miles away. This was not how the evening was supposed to begin. She had imagined a quiet dinner, polite conversation, and the distinct possibility of a civil parting. However, the universe had other plans. A pair of headlights cut through the gloom behind her, growing brighter, slowing. A sleek, black SUV, the kind that drinks gasoline and whispers of silent, expensive power, pulled up behind her tired sedan. For a moment, she held her breath, a knot of pure city-bred fear tightening in her stomach. Then a door opened. A man emerged from the driver's side, stepping into the twin beams of his own headlights. He was a silhouette carved from the darkness, tall and broad in a way that seemed to absorb the light around him. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that was more menacing than any sudden motion. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, but no tie. His white shirt was open at the collar. As he approached her window, the details sharpened. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble, dark hair swept back from his brow, and eyes that seemed to hold the same deep, inscrutable darkness as the night itself. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He simply stopped beside her door and looked down at her, his expression a mask of unreadable neutrality. Problem. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It was not a question of concern. It was a statement of fact. Olivia found her own voice, surprised it didn't shake. My car died. I think it's the alternator, but I wouldn't know an alternator if it sat down and ordered a drink. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. Pop the hood. It was a command, not a request. She fumbled for the latch, her fingers clumsy. The hood sprang open with a rusty squeal. He walked to the front of her car, placing his hands on the frame and leaning in, his form eclipsing the engine bay. Olivia watched him in the rearview mirror. He worked with a quiet, surgical precision. There was no wasted movement, no frustrated sigh. He rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in the faint, intricate lines of old tattoos. On his left pinky, a heavy gold signet ring caught the light, a stark contrast to the grease he was now methodically wiping away with a handkerchief he produced from his pocket. She should have been terrified. A strange man on a dark road. A woman alone. Every warning bell she had ever heard was screaming in her head. But fear was being crowded out by a strange, unwelcome sense of calm. It was his competence. The sheer, unshakable certainty in his posture. He moved as if the world was a machine he understood intimately, a series of levers and gears he could manipulate at will. This broken-down car was not a crisis to him. It was merely a puzzle with a known solution. After a few minutes of silence, he straightened up and walked back to her window. It's the battery terminal. Corroded. I can fix it, but it won't last forever. You need a new car. This one has sentimental value, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. It sounded foolish, even to her. His eyes met hers in the dim light. They were a startlingly clear, cold gray, like a winter sky. Sentiment is expensive. It gets you stranded on roads like this. He held her gaze for a beat too long, and she felt a jolt, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with her predicament. It was the feeling of being truly seen, of being assessed and catalogued in a single, penetrating glance. He returned to the engine, and she heard the scrape of metal on metal. He was using a tool from his own vehicle. A few more minutes passed in that charged silence. Olivia smoothed down her red dress, suddenly self-conscious. It was a dress meant for a first impression, for a candlelit restaurant and polite smiles. It felt entirely out of place here, in this theater of grease and silent masculinity. She was an archivist. Her life was ordered, catalogued, and quiet. She dealt in paper and history, in things that were already finished. This man, this moment, felt dangerously unfinished. He slammed the hood shut. The sound was definitive, a period at the end of a sentence. "Try it now," he said, his voice carrying easily through the closed window. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared to life, settling into a steady, rumbling idle. Relief washed over her so intensely it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she called out, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done. Can I pay you something?" He was already walking back to his SUV. He paused with his hand on the door.
No.
"At least let me get your name," she insisted, feeling a strange need to anchor this surreal encounter with something as mundane as a name. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the headlights.
Dante. Just Dante.
"No last name. Of course." "I'm Olivia," she offered. He gave no indication that he had heard her. He got back into his vehicle, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud. She expected him to drive away, to disappear back into the night as suddenly as he had appeared. But his SUV remained idling behind her. He flashed his high beams once. The message was clear.
Go.
"I'm behind you." A new kind of unease settled over her. He wasn't leaving. He was following her. She told herself it was a kindness, a gentlemanly gesture to ensure the faulty car didn't leave her stranded again. But the man who had looked at her with those cold, assessing eyes was no simple gentleman. He was something else entirely. She put the car in drive, her hands tight on the wheel, and pulled back onto the road. The black SUV fell in behind her, maintaining a steady, constant distance. It wasn't comforting. It felt like an escort. It felt like she was being caged. For 20 minutes, he followed. The lights of the city grew closer, a welcome smear of civilization on the horizon. She drove directly to the restaurant, a high-end Italian place called Belladonna, its name glowing in elegant script above the entrance. She pulled into the valet line, her old car looking shabby and out of place between a Porsche and a Mercedes. She handed her keys to the attendant, feeling Dante's presence behind her like a physical weight. His SUV had pulled over to the curb a short distance away, its engine a low thrum in the night. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the strange tension of the last half hour. She was late, but she was here. The weirdest part of her night was over. She could walk inside, find her blind date, a man named Mr. Moretti, arranged by a well-meaning colleague, and salvage what was left of the evening. She smoothed her dress one last time and walked through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. The maitre d' greeted her with a polite, practiced smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Olivia said. "I'm here to meet Mr. Moretti." The man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite name. Respect? Or was it fear? "Of course. Mr. Moretti is already waiting for you. Right this way." He led her through the hushed, elegant dining room, past tables of laughing couples and families sharing plates of pasta. He stopped at a secluded booth in the back corner, one that offered a commanding view of the entire restaurant, including the entrance. A man was sitting with his back to her, looking out at the room. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit. On the table before him, his hands rested, still and powerful. On his left pinky, a gold signet ring gleamed under the soft light. The maitre d' cleared his throat. "Mr. Moretti, your guest has arrived." The man turned his head slowly. He looked up at her, and the entire world tilted on its axis. It was him.
It was Dante.
His eyes, those same cold gray eyes that had stared into hers on that dark road, held a flicker of something new. Not surprise. Something closer to weary, sardonic resignation. He was her blind date. The man she was afraid of on the road was the man who was now gesturing to the empty seat across from him. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the danger had not ended when she'd arrived. It had just followed her inside. She sat, her legs feeling unsteady. The plush leather of the booth did nothing to comfort her. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. He watched her, his expression unreadable, as a waiter appeared to fill their water glasses. "Olivia," he said, and the way he spoke her name was different now. It was a confirmation, not a question. It sounded like a verdict. "Dante Moretti," she replied, her voice a little breathless. She finally had his full name. It felt heavy, laden with a significance she didn't understand yet. "My family's idea," he said, by way of an explanation for the blind date. "They are traditionalists. They believe a man in my position requires stability." He said the word stability as if it were a foreign concept, something he had read about in a book but never experienced. "And what is your position?" she asked, though a part of her was terrified to know the answer. A waiter arrived to take their order. Dante didn't look at the menu. "Bring us the tasting menu. And a bottle of the Barolo." He dismissed the man with a slight nod, his attention never leaving her face. "My position," he continued, as if there had been no interruption, "is managing complicated assets. And people." It was an evasion, but it was also the truth. She could feel it. The way the staff moved around him. The way other diners subconsciously gave their table a wide berth. He owned the space, not just the table but the entire room. His power was a palpable force, an invisible current that bent the atmosphere around him. "And my colleague," Olivia said, connecting the dots. "The one who set this up. She works in your legal department." "She is very loyal," Dante said, and the compliment sounded like a threat. In his world, loyalty wasn't a virtue. It was a requirement for survival. The first course arrived. Delicate scallops on a bed of saffron risotto. Olivia picked up her fork, but her appetite had vanished. "You could have told me who you were on the road. And you could have told me where you were going," he countered. "We both chose to withhold information. It seems we have something in common." "I don't think we have anything in common," she said, more sharply than she intended. His lips quirked in something that was not quite a smile.
No?
"You see a problem, and you try to understand it. Your car, your books, your history. I do the same. The only difference is the tools we use." Before she could respond, she noticed a subtle shift in the room. Two men had entered and taken seats at the bar. They were dressed in expensive, slightly flashy suits. They weren't drinking. They were watching. Their eyes kept flicking from Dante to her, their expressions hard and predatory. Dante's posture didn't change, but Olivia saw his hand, the one resting on the table, clench slightly. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Business associates of a rival firm," he said, his voice dropping to that same low rumble she'd heard on the road. "They are here to send a message." "What message?" "That nothing is off limits." His gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his icy control. It was a flicker of something dark and protective. "In a moment I am going to stand up. You are going to walk to the ladies' room. There is an exit in the back. Go through it, get a cab, and go home. Do not look back." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. The abstract danger she had sensed in him had just walked into the room and sat down at the bar. This was her exit, her chance to run back to her quiet, ordered life. He was giving her a way out. Most people would have taken it. They would have run and never looked back. But as she looked at the men at the bar, she saw the way they were looking at her.
They weren't just watching Dante.
They were watching her. They were memorizing her face, her red dress. They were marking her as his. Running wouldn't make her safe. It would only make her an easier target. And then she looked at Dante. He was preparing to face them alone. He had helped her on the road. He had been, in his own strange way, her protector. She told herself it was survival instinct. She told herself it was a debt repaid. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. She did not want to leave him alone. So she did something insane. She picked up her wine glass, her hand steady, and met his eyes. Then, with a deliberate flick of her wrist, she sent the glass tumbling off the table. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The entire restaurant went silent. Every head turned towards their table. In the shocked stillness, she had created the one thing his enemies couldn't control, a scene. In the ensuing chaos of waiters rushing over and the maitre d' apologizing, Dante's hand shot across the table and gripped her arm. His fingers were like steel bands. He pulled her close, his body a solid shield between her and the rest of the room. His face was inches from hers, his gray eyes blazing with a furious, incredulous fire. "What did you do?" he hissed, his breath warm against her cheek. "I bought you a distraction," she breathed back, her voice shaking only slightly. "Use it." The men at the bar were on their feet, but the attention of the entire room was on the broken glass, on the woman in the red dress. It was the perfect cover. Dante's expression shifted from fury to a grudging, dangerous respect. He stood, pulling her with him. "Stay behind me," he ordered, and his hand moved from her arm to the small of her back, guiding her, protecting her. He moved through the restaurant with the lethal grace of a panther, weaving through the tables towards a service exit. Because she had created the scene, the rival family now knew she was with him. She was no longer a civilian caught in the crossfire. She was part of the equation. Therefore, she couldn't just go home. He had to take her somewhere safe. They burst out into a back alley, the sounds of the city a sudden roar. A black town car was waiting, its engine already running. A man in the driver's seat nodded grimly at Dante as he bundled Olivia into the back and slid in beside her. The car peeled away from the curb just as the two men from the bar emerged into the alley. "They're following," the driver said, his eyes on the rearview mirror.
"Lose them," Dante said.
His body was tense beside her, a coiled spring of controlled violence. The car chase was nothing like the movies. It was a terrifying, elegant dance of near misses and impossible turns through the city's concrete canyons. Dante gave quiet, clipped instructions to his driver, his voice never rising. He was a general commanding a battle. At one point, a dark sedan sideswiped them, the screech of metal on metal deafening. Olivia was thrown against the door, her head cracking against the window. For a second, the world went white. When her vision cleared, Dante was leaning over her, his hands framing her face, his eyes wild with a terror that stunned her more than the impact. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice raw. "I'm fine," she managed to say. The sight of his fear for her, a deep, primal fear that shattered his cold composure, was a more intimate touch than a kiss. He saw that she was telling the truth and leaned back, but the mask didn't quite settle back into place. A crack remained. They finally lost the other car in the labyrinthine streets of the industrial district. The driver took them to a sleek, modern skyscraper downtown, pulling into a private underground garage. They rode a silent, key-operated elevator directly to the penthouse. The doors opened onto a space of breathtaking, minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering panorama of the city. But the windows were made of thick, reinforced glass, and the front door was a slab of reinforced steel. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Dante poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Drink this." She took it. The whiskey burned a welcome trail down her throat. He was on the phone, his back to her, speaking in low, rapid Italian. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He was giving orders. He hung up and turned to her. "The men who followed us have been handled," he said. His face was grim. She knew what handled meant. She knew it meant they were no longer a problem, that they had been violently and permanently removed from the equation. The quiet archivist she had been that morning would have been horrified. But the woman standing here now, the woman who had shattered a wine glass to start a war, simply nodded. She had crossed a line tonight, and she couldn't see the way back. He saw the acceptance in her eyes. He walked over to her, his movements slow. He noticed a small trickle of blood on her temple, where she had hit the window. He gently tilted her chin up, his thumb brushing away the blood. His touch was unexpectedly soft. "You should have run when I told you to," he said, his voice quiet. "You would have been alone," she replied. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The silence that followed was the most honest conversation they'd had. It was a confession from both of them. He had tried to protect her by pushing her away. She had refused to go. In that moment, They were no longer a mafia boss and a civilian. They were two people in a room, bound by a violence they had both chosen. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. He held it out for her to see. It was a photograph of her apartment building, taken from across the street. It had been sent a few minutes ago. The message beneath it was simple. 2 words. We know. The threat was no longer just about him. She was the leverage now. She was the target. You can't go home, he said, his voice flat and hard. You'll stay here. It's the only way to keep you safe. She looked around the beautiful, sterile cage of his apartment. She thought of her small, cluttered apartment, filled with books and memories. That life was over. She knew it. But looking at Dante, at the fierce, protective fire that had returned to his eyes, she found she wasn't afraid. She had made a choice at that table, and she would not unmake it now. Okay, she said. He showed her to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. It was as impersonal as a hotel suite, but safe. As he left her at the door, he hesitated. Olivia, he said, and there was a rough, pained edge to his voice. I am sorry for this. He did not apologize easily. The words felt like they were torn from him. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Left alone, Olivia wandered the room. Her adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. On a marble-topped side table, something caught her eye. A silver picture frame, turned face down. Curiosity, the driving instinct of her profession, got the better of her. She picked it up and turned it over.
It was a photograph of Dante.
He was younger, his face softer, and he was laughing. His arm was around a beautiful woman with dark, smiling eyes. They looked happy, carefree. It was a version of him she couldn't reconcile with the man she knew. This was the woman he had lost. The wound he carried. The reason he dreaded the idea of stability. He wasn't just protecting Olivia from his enemies. He was protecting her from himself, from becoming another ghost in a silver frame. But as she stood there, clutching the picture, she realized it was already too late for that. The attack came just before dawn. A muffled explosion from the direction of the service entrance, followed by the sharp, percussive crack of gunfire. Dante was at her door in an instant, a gun in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. She did as she was told, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could hear the sounds of a firefight, shouts in Italian, the splintering of wood. He was out there, fighting for her, for this fortress that had been breached. She was not a warrior. She was an archivist. She thought in systems, in processes, in cause and effect. And she refused to be a damsel cowering in a tower. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for a weapon, for an advantage. Then she saw it. A small, discreet panel on the wall near the door, labeled Fire Suppression System. The building was state-of-the-art. She knew from her own research on historical building codes what that meant. A halon gas release. Colorless, odorless, it would suck the oxygen from the air, disorienting anyone not prepared for it. It wouldn't kill them, but it would buy time. She heard a heavy thud against her door. Someone was trying to break it down. Another thud, and the wood splintered. She didn't hesitate. She ran to the panel, broke the glass with the heel of her shoe, and pulled the lever. A low hiss filled the air. The man who finally kicked the door in stumbled forward, gasping, his eyes wide and confused as the oxygen thinned around him. He was momentarily helpless. It was all the time Dante needed. He appeared in the doorway, a phantom in the chaos, and neutralized the threat with 2 precise, silent shots. The firefight was over. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of the gas. Dante walked towards her through the chemical fog, his gun still held at his side. He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching her face, checking for injury, for fear. He found only a calm, resolute stillness. He looked around the room, at the downed man, at the activated system, at her. He holstered his weapon. He didn't thank her. He didn't tell her she was brave. He gave her the highest compliment his world allowed. You belong here. It was an acknowledgement. acclaiming. It meant she had the mind of a survivor. Later, after his men had quietly and efficiently cleaned up the mess, they stood by the vast, floor-to-ceiling window. The first light of dawn was breaking over the city. The penthouse was a wreck, the illusion of its safety shattered. Her old life was a ghost. His world had consumed it. This was the cost. He stood beside her, not touching, but she could feel the heat of his body. He was turning his signet ring. A nervous, repetitive motion she now understood was a sign of turmoil beneath the calm surface. "This was not the date I expected," she said, her voice quiet in the dawn stillness. He turned his head to look at her. A small, weary smile touched his lips, a flicker of warmth in his cold, gray eyes. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. "Neither did I, Olivia." It was not a promise of love, or a happily ever after. It was an acceptance of a shared, dangerous reality. They were two survivors, standing together at the start of a war, looking out at a city that would forever be their battleground. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was alone.